The shelling did not begin all at once. It started with a distant concussion. Somewhere beyond the river line, a low tremor that seemed at first like construction, equipment, or a passing freight train. In a small Ukrainian city, mornings had become uncertain like that. And you listened before you moved, you waited before you assumed. And then the second blast came closer. Windows rattled across the central square. A thin cloud of dust slipped from the ceiling corners inside the mayor's office. Papers on her desk shifted slightly from the vibration. She looked up. Outside, the City Hall building stood in the same place it had stood for decades. Pale stone facade, narrow steps leading up from the square, a Ukrainian flag moving in the cold air. Inside that building, she had spent years managing budgets, road repairs, school funding, winter heating schedules, routine civic work, the mechanics of ordinary life. Now the mechanics were different. The first reports arrived by phone. Outlying streets hit, electrical lines down, a residential block struck on the east side, emergency crews attempting access. She did not leave her chair immediately. She asked for confirmation. Which district? How many buildings? Were there injuries? Could the ambulances reach the area? Another blast, closer this time. The glass panes trembled again, harder. Staff members moved quickly through the corridor. Some had already gathered their bags. A few had received messages from family members urging them to come home. One aide stepped into her office and said simply that the shelling was approaching the central district, approaching her street. It is a particular kind of moment when the abstract becomes immediate, when a map with red markings turns into the sound outside your own window. She stood then, not to leave, but to walk to the hallway. The corridor smelled faintly of old paper and heating pipes. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Through the stairwell window, smoke could now be seen rising from somewhere beyond the square. Someone suggested relocation to a safer administrative site on the western edge of the city. Someone else mentioned the regional directive allowing municipal leadership to evacuate under sustained attack. She listened, then she shook her head. City Hall remained the coordination center. Emergency services were routed through these rooms. Communication equipment was here. Records were here. Generators were here. If she left, operations would fragment. She returned to her desk and began issuing instructions. Backup power systems were checked. Direct contact established with local police and fire units. School basements designated as temporary shelters. Water distribution points identified. Outside, another impact, this one loud enough to send a visible ripple through the office window. A junior staff member flinched visibly in the doorway. The mayor's voice, according to those in the room, did not rise. It did not tremble. It remained steady. "We stay," she said quietly. "This is where we work." It was not a slogan. It was not defiance for the sake of defiance. It was administrative clarity. As shelling reached her street, she remained in the building that symbolized local governance, municipal responsibility, and civilian order. Emergency calls began to multiply. Families reporting damage, elderly residents trapped on upper floors. A pharmacy hit near the tram line. The mayor moved between offices. She spoke directly with responders. She confirmed resource allocation. She ensured that evacuation buses were rerouted around damaged roads. The square outside had partially emptied. Those who remained moved quickly, heads low, crossing open space in short bursts between detonations. The Ukrainian flag above City Hall continued to move in the wind. Inside, the mayor signed emergency authorizations for fuel access and equipment deployment. She approved temporary housing for displaced families. She coordinated with regional officials without leaving her post. A staff member again urged her to consider relocation. The reply was brief. "If this building stands," she said, "we stand in it." There is something stark about that image. Not theatrical, not dramatic, just a person at a desk while artillery closes in. The shelling did not pause out of respect for civic authority. It continued. Windows across the square shattered. Smoke thickened in the eastern sky. But City Hall did not empty. Under her direction, municipal workers continued dispatch operations. Fire crews moved through debris. Volunteers organized food distribution in underground spaces. The mayor remained visible. She walked the corridor. She answered direct calls. She looked people in the eye. At one point, a distant explosion caused ceiling plaster to fall in a narrow strip near the entrance. No one left. Outside, damage accumulated. Inside, governance continued. It was in its own way an assertion, not through speeches, through presence. In the middle of sustained shelling on her own street, she did not abandon the building that held the administrative heart of her city. And in that choice, in that refusal to step away, something quiet but unmistakable took shape. Leadership, she later said in a brief exchange inside those same walls, means you are here. Short, direct, unadorned. The shelling would go on, but so would she. The impacts grew closer as the morning moved forward. What had begun as distant concussions became a pattern, a whistle, a pause, a blast, then another. The rhythm of incoming fire settled over the central district like a second clock, marking time in seconds instead of minutes. Inside Ukrainian City Hall, the mayor did not retreat to a protected basement office. She stayed on the main floor. Phones rang without interruption, landlines, mobile phones, direct emergency channels. Each call carried fragments of urgency, addresses, injuries, blocked roads, power failures. She moved between desks instead of summoning people to hers. In one office, a map of the city was laid flat across a conference table. Colored markers showed reported damage. As new information arrived, the markings spread inward toward the square. Her street was no longer peripheral. An explosion struck close enough to send a sharp cracking sound through the building's facade. Glass shattered somewhere in the lower level. A staff member instinctively crouched. The mayor did not. She paused, waited for confirmation of structural damage, and then resumed speaking into the phone already in her hand. Emergency generators were activated as a precaution. The lights flickered once, then stabilized. The heating system continued running. Communication equipment remained operational. The building held. Outside, smoke drifted across the square in uneven waves. A municipal vehicle sped past with sirens engaged, weaving around debris. Inside, she requested updated casualty figures. Her questions were precise. How many injured? Which hospital receiving them? Is the surgical wing operational? Do we need blood supplies transferred? There was no theatrical urgency in her voice, only focus. One senior official again suggested relocation to the underground shelter designated for leadership continuity. The mayor listened. She understood the protocol, but she remained in the hallway where staff could see her. People need to know we're still here, she said quietly. It was not delivered as defiance. It was delivered as reasoning. In moments of sustained attack, absence communicates something. So does presence. Throughout the morning, residents continued to call City Hall directly. Some did not ask for resources. Some simply asked whether the administration was still functioning. Yes, they were told. Yes, the mayor is here. Reports came in of a residential building struck 2 blocks away. Fire crews were en route, but delayed by debris in the roadway. The mayor authorized immediate clearance using municipal heavy equipment. A transportation official hesitated, citing risk. She responded without raising her voice. "Send them," she said. "They'll need a path." The shelling did not discriminate between infrastructure and identity. It struck near homes, near shops, near a pharmacy that had served the neighborhood for years. From a window in the upper corridor, smoke could now be seen rising from a structure at the edge of her own street. An aide approached quietly and informed her that her residential block had been impacted. There was a brief silence. Not dramatic, not prolonged, just a fraction of stillness before she asked the next question. "Are there injuries reported?" The aide did not know yet. She nodded once and returned to the operations table. There are moments when private concern collides with public duty. The line between them narrows to almost nothing. Inside City Hall, she chose which side of that line she would occupy. Calls from regional authorities increased. Coordination of humanitarian corridors, assessment of water system integrity, fuel reserves. She remained in the building, relaying information in measured tones. Outside, a blast struck near enough to shake dust loose from the ceiling again. This time, fragments of plaster fell near the staircase landing. Staff members glanced upward. She did not issue reassurances. She continued issuing instructions. By early afternoon, portions of the central district had lost electricity. Temporary shelters in school basements began filling with residents seeking protection from the bombardment. The mayor directed food stocks to be transferred from municipal storage. She approved the use of public buses to transport elderly residents away from heavily hit streets. Every decision carried weight. Every minute required choice. A young municipal employee later described watching her move through the corridor as the shelling intensified. "She looked at each of us," he said, "and you could see she had decided to remain, decided that City Hall would not become an empty symbol. At one point, a loud detonation echoed so sharply that several lights flickered out entirely. Emergency power engaged again. The hallway dimmed but did not darken completely. In that muted light, she stood at the center of a cluster of department heads. "Keep going," she said. 3 words, no speech, no flourish. Outside, smoke obscured part of the square. The Ukrainian flag atop the building was still visible between drifting gray clouds. Ambulances continued to move. Fire crews continued to respond. Inside, governance continued. She was informed mid-afternoon that the damage to her own residential building had been confirmed. Windows blown out, structural cracks reported. There was no public reaction. She did not leave to inspect it. Instead, she authorized temporary accommodation for displaced families from that same block, including her own neighbors. Administrative neutrality remained intact. The shelling pattern shifted slightly westward as the hours progressed, but intermittent impacts continued near the central district. City Hall sustained minor damage, broken windows on the lower level, exterior facade chipped, debris scattered across the steps. It did not close. Through it all, the mayor's posture remained unchanged, upright, deliberate, present. At one point, standing near the map table as new damage reports were added in red, she spoke softly enough that only those nearest heard. "This is our city," she said. "We don't leave it." Again, not a declaration to cameras, not rhetoric, a simple articulation of position. The afternoon light dimmed under drifting smoke. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the corridor walls. And still, she remained inside Ukrainian City Hall as shelling reached and struck her own street. The building stood. So did she. By early evening, the pace of shelling began to shift. Not stop, but thin out. The sharp rhythm that had defined the day softened into sporadic impacts further from the central square. Smoke still hovered above parts of the district, drifting slowly in the colder air. Sirens continued, but less frequently. Inside Ukrainian City Hall, the lights remained on. The corridors were marked now with scattered fragments of plaster and glass swept into careful piles along the walls. Windows on the lower level were boarded temporarily with materials pulled from municipal storage. No ceremony accompanied that work. It was simply done. The mayor remained in the building as daylight began to fade. She had not stepped outside during the heaviest shelling. Reports had come to her, updates had come to her, decisions had been made from within those walls. Now, as the immediate barrage receded, she moved toward the entrance. The main doors opened onto a square altered by the day's events. Debris lay across the paving stones. A burned vehicle stood abandoned near the curb. Several nearby storefront windows were blown out. The facade of City Hall bore visible scars, chipped stone, shattered glass along the lower frames, dust clinging to the columns, but the structure stood. The Ukrainian flag above it remained intact. She stepped onto the top stair and paused, taking in the scene without visible reaction. Emergency crews were still at work down the block. Firefighters sprayed water into a smoldering residential structure. Utility workers examined a damaged power line hanging at an angle across the street. Residents moved carefully through the square, some carrying bags, others guiding elderly relatives toward temporary shelters. The mayor did not address them with a speech. She descended the steps and walked toward the nearest cluster of responders. Her questions were the same as they had been all day. "Are you supplied? Do you need additional equipment? How many residents remain inside that building?" Answers were given quickly. She nodded. She returned briefly inside to authorize additional fuel distribution for overnight emergency operations. She confirmed that water delivery would continue to affected districts through the night. She ensured that shelters had adequate staffing. There was no sign of departure, no preparation to relocate administrative functions elsewhere. As darkness settled over the city, portable lights illuminated sections of the square. The sound of generators blended with the distant thud of isolated impacts beyond the city center. Inside City Hall, staff rotated shifts. Some who had remained throughout the day were encouraged to rest. Others arrived to replace them. The mayor stayed. An aide quietly informed her that it would be possible to relocate her to a safer location for the night. She declined. "This is where the work is," she said. Short, undramatic, final. Reports confirmed structural damage to multiple residential buildings, including the one on her own street. Windows shattered, walls cracked, residents displaced. She authorized municipal housing assistance without exception. Her own situation was not addressed separately. By late evening, the flow of emergency calls slowed. not because the damage was small, but because the immediate crisis response had stabilized. Fire hotspots were contained, medical transports completed, roads partially cleared. City Hall functioned as it had that morning, as a center of coordination. But now it bore the marks of having endured attack alongside the rest of the city. In a brief exchange with staff gathered near the map table, she spoke again almost in passing. "We're still here," she said. It was not triumphant. It was factual. The building had not emptied when shelling reached her street. The offices had not gone dark. Municipal authority had not retreated underground or beyond city limits. Through sustained bombardment, governance had remained visible. Outside, residents looked toward the illuminated windows of City Hall as night deepened. The site carried weight without commentary. Presence matters. The mayor completed final confirmations for the evening response teams. She checked once more with emergency services. She reviewed preliminary damage assessments. Then she walked the corridor slowly, stopping in each office where lights were still on. She thanked the staff who had remained. No cameras followed her. No statement was drafted. The shelling that had reached her own street had not driven her from the building that symbolized civilian order in a time of attack. City Hall stood. She stood with it. And as the night settled over a damaged but functioning Ukrainian city, the work continued under its roof.